Hi, I'm Elizabeth Perry and I'm part of the Anglican Alliance, which connects, equips and inspires the worldwide Anglican family to work for a world free of poverty and injustice and to safeguard creation. As the Anglican Alliance, we get to see what's happening across the whole communion, what's impacting people's lives, the blessings and the challenges, and how people are responding to those challenges. In this short video, I want to share some of the ways that people across the whole world are being impacted by environmental problems and climate change. But I also want to share some of the ways that Anglicans across the communion are responding to those challenges and how they're living out the fifth mark of mission, and how all of us can strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. We live in a fabulous world. It's full of amazing creatures and plants. Planet Earth is a place of astonishing variety, richness and interconnection. But the integrity of creation is under threat from climate change, from environmental degradation, from biodiversity loss. Extreme weather events, sea level rise and changed rainfall patterns are severely impacting millions of people across the world. Across the communion, Anglicans are on the front line of the climate and environmental emergencies. But they're not only affected by the impacts of climate change, they're also taking action to respond to its challenges. So, for example, in South Africa, Burundi, Kenya and Uganda, Anglican churches are engaged in reforestation initiatives which will help mitigate climate change. They're taking action on pollution and waste. Churches are helping people adapt to a changing climate. In the Pacific, the Anglican Church of Melanesia is helping with food security and preparing people for relocation. People are greening their churches, using renewable energy, adopting net zero targets, using their land for environmental projects, and committing to green protocols, all of which will help prevent further climate change. They're celebrating the season of creation, praying and fasting for the climate, and bringing creation care into the worshipping life of the church. They're speaking out and calling for change. Young people are often leading the way. Churches are divesting from fossil fuels and investing in solar projects and other renewable energy schemes. And of course, churches are always amongst the first responders when disasters hit, and they're active in long-term recovery. Last December, I had the privilege of going to the UN climate talks in Madrid. One of the side events was a panel discussion entitled "Inspiring Courage to Act and Adapt in a Climate Emergency." The final speaker was Professor Elizabeth Holland, Professor of Climate Change at the University of the South Pacific, who was a co-recipient of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize for her contribution to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. After speaking from a scientific perspective, Professor Holland said, "I would like to tell you the story of what courage looks like in our youth in the Pacific." And she went on to describe the work of young Anglicans in Tonga, who had trained in disaster preparedness and response, and rose to the challenge of putting their training into action when Tropical Cyclone Gita hit very shortly afterwards. A renowned climate scientist singled out young Anglicans as her source of inspiration. It was an incredibly special moment. As well as responding at local level, Anglicans are also connecting and sharing across the communion to respond to the impacts of climate change. They're using the Pastors and Disasters Toolkit to be equipped for disaster preparedness and response. A new resilience online course was launched in October 2020 with participants from 44 countries. There's a climate resilience community of practice. And there are things happening at communion-wide level. A number of resolutions on the environment and climate change have been adopted by the Anglican Consultative Council and Lambeth conferences. There is an Anglican Communion environmental network which connects people across the communion. There are eco-bishops who make ecological concerns a particular focus of their ministry. The Anglican Communion has a presence at the United Nations and is accredited to the UN Environment Assembly. And the Anglican Alliance itself provides a convening platform after disasters, coordinating responses across the communion. There is a huge amount happening across the communion. But the seriousness of the crises God's world is facing requires all of us to take action. So what else can we be doing as individuals and churches to engage with the fifth mark of mission? Gus Beth has said, "I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that." It seems to me that what we need more than anything is a heart or mind level change, to change the way we see the world and relate to it in our deepest being. We need that spiritual and cultural transformation. Many people, especially in the West, have an extractive worldview, one where we use the world and take from it. It's particularly prevalent in societies whose wealth is derived from an economy based on extraction and exploitation. But there are other worldviews, including within the Anglican Communion. Indigenous Christians across the Communion share a worldview that is about relationship. So, Indigenous Maori and Pacific peoples understand creation as inherently unified, with a profound connection among all that exists with creation. Plants and birds, rivers, lakes and sea, mountains and hills, animals and insects, all have value in themselves and are to be respected and honoured. Human beings are positioned in creation, not as supreme masters over the earth community, but as interdependent members of the earth community. This understanding, they say, requires us to broaden our gaze beyond our anthropocentric concerns to include consideration of all living entities in everything we do. This relational worldview is shared by Indigenous Anglicans in Africa, the Amazon and the Arctic. Kinship and connection with God's good earth, discerning, protecting and joining in creation's song of praise and hearing her groans are deeply biblical ideas. We need so very much to turn away from or repent of a mentality of extraction and embrace one of relationship for the sake of God's good earth and that of our brothers and sisters across the world. Only when we love the world wholeheartedly as God does, only when we treasure it and understand our place in it and know our profound interconnectedness with all its creatures and understand our dependence on its bounty, only then will we care enough to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth, the fifth Anglican mark of mission. And to love it, we have to know it. We need to connect and reconnect with our world over and over. We need to marvel at its wonders and the sheer miracle of it all. We need to remember we come from the earth, that we're part of it, and join in the song of creation.